Wally Mueller, United States Army, Vietnam. Wally served with the 1st Platoon, 498th Air Ambulance Company in Vietnam in 1966 and 1967. As a medic, he was a Dustoff pilot. He explains how that word Dustoff comes about in this interview. He was in charge of Medevacs. He was a helicopter pilot with the Hueys. He flew two different Huey helicopters and flew hundreds and thousands of missions and transported patients back and forth from the landing zones out in the field. Wally's story is incredible. I hope you stick with this one. This is a great story. I have very few Dustoff pilot stories from Vietnam, and Wally's is one of the best. So I'd like to thank Brandon Glidden for sponsoring this story. Brandon, thank you for making it possible for others to hear about what Wally did in Vietnam. I interviewed Wally. I was honored to interview Wally on November 29, 2006 in Abington, Maryland. One of the many times I was in Maryland. And like I said, Wally has a great story. He served 37 years in the Army. God bless you, Wally. He attended my premiere of my film Beyond the Badge in Bel Air, Maryland in 2013. And there's a picture of him at the beginning of this video. So I love all my veterans. I'm not afraid to take ownership in them and tell them I love them. And if you'd like to sponsor one of these many stories, I wish you would contact me. There's information in the video description and in the comment section if you'd like to donate or sponsor a story. So those of you who have done so, thank you. God bless you for it. And I know He will. So I'm excited to share this story with you folks. Wally Mueller, Vietnam Dustoff, Medevac helicopter pilot. Tremendous stories. I would share this with a family friend, a loved one, somebody you may know, young or old. And subscribe to this channel. Let's keep this thing going. God bless you. Something to that effect. Now,
okay.
You're 64 now.
Yes.
What year were you in Vietnam?
I went to Vietnam in July of 1966 and returned home on the 4th of July 1967.
Now, were you already in the military, or were you just the first time you went in?
No, I'd been in the military. I went through flight school.
What year did you actually go into the military?
I went in the military in October of 1964.
Okay.
After I graduated from college in ROTC.
So Vietnam comes along, and are you're active duty, so you're just in preparation to go to Nam, or why did you wait 3 years to go, or whatever?
Well, the schooling. First I went to the Medical Field Service School at Fort Sam Houston. That's your basic course. And then I was sent to, from there, I went to flight school, which is a year. And from there I was assigned to the 45th Air Ambulance Company at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which was being just assembled, essentially built to go to Vietnam. And I was sent down to back to Fort Sam Houston for a course, Essential Medics for Aviators. Now this was a 30-day course where they took people who had a medical background, but you did things like battlefield triage, learning, you looked at wounds, you really got more involved than just being a medic. You made, because as the aircraft commander, even though the medic was on there, when you got into a situation, and luckily I only had to do it once during my tour, you'd get into an LZ where you might have more patients than you could handle on a single aircraft. So you'd actually, if it wasn't under fire at the time, you get out and triage, battlefield triage. In other words, you'd say, take the ones that I can save, and the ones that you didn't think you could save, you'd leave for a later trip, knowing that by the time you got back there, they probably wouldn't be alive. But it was something that you were actually trained to do.
Okay, so you had not been to Vietnam until 1967?
66.
Okay, 66 is
Right.
the first time you went in country.
Yes.
Can you just tell me about what you experienced the first time you got to Vietnam? Was it what you thought it would be? Was there a particular smell or sight or Or what do you remember about the first impression about being there?
Well, actually, I was very fortunate. I was assigned to the 1st platoon of the 498th Air Ambulance Company, and their home base was Nha Trang, Vietnam, which is a beach resort. And we lived in an old French villa right in town. It was the Dustoff Villa, it was called, and it was maybe a half mile from the flight line. And we'd walk up and down the streets, and you know, the guys would come by with their carts with the chicken noodle soup, and we'd go out and eat off the carts and everything. Now you have to remember, this was early in '66. It wasn't South Vietnam. The big pushes hadn't started yet. There were, you know, it was big military base there. So it was like living in the Orient under normal circumstances until you got out into the countryside. Then it changed a little bit.
Do you remember when President Johnson ordered the Air Mobile Division to Vietnam in July of '65? Do you remember that at all?
Yeah, I remember that because I was in the military. So that was the, you know, yeah, first cav.
Yeah. Well, give me just a little bit.
Because most of the guys in my flight school class, because I was a medic, I didn't go to the cav. I went to an air ambulance unit. Most of them did go to the cav. That's what they were, the first year replacements into the cav.
Just give me just a quick overview, a synopsis of the Air Mobile Division and what it was used for, and then the helicopter usage in Vietnam, what it was used for.
Well, basically, the ground troops would use it. They used them. They were called slicks. You had in a normal unit, not an air ambulance unit, you'd have 3 types of aircraft. You'd have light observation helicopter, loaches, and they normally went out and looked around. Then you had gunships, which protected the troop carriers, which were called slicks. So they came in, and they were in different type configurations. You might have an observation company, you might have a gun company, but in the cav, they were integrated into troops, and they were all melded together. So you had observation guys, the guys that went out and looked in front of you. Then you had your red team, which were the guys that got on the birds and flew in, and then you had, you know, the fire teams, which would cover them from the air.
And now your job, you were with what do they call them, Dustoffs?
Well, it was an air ambulance company, and back in '64, I believe it was, and I actually brought the book so you can look in there, but they came out with a list of call signs for different units, and one of the call signs on there was Dustoff, and most of the Medevacs were being done down in Delta, and the pickups were in the rice paddies on the roads around the rice paddies. So when the birds came in and pick up their wounded, they brought up a lot of dust. When he saw that, he took the name, that the guy chose the name Dustoff. Well, that then stuck not only for that unit, but for every air ambulance unit. Another unique thing for the air ambulance units was that the individuals, the pilots, got numbers. In other words, I was Dustoff 19. We didn't go by the aircraft numbers. Most other organizations went by, you know, was Slick 456, and the last 3 numbers of the Slick was 456, so they had a call sign, you know, Red Dog 139, you know. So they gave you the aircraft number, whereas with the Dustoff guys, we got a number when we got to a unit, and the numbers coincided. First platoon were 1 to 11 through 19 or thereabouts, and the second platoon was in the 20s, third platoon was in the 30s. So each individual was identified as well, and we stuck with that so that when you were going into an LZ, they actually knew who was coming, and you know, so you pretty much got a trademark with you.
Okay. So you're in country, you're in an air ambulance unit.
Company. And a platoon. The company was split up in 3 locations. There was a platoon in maintenance in Nha Trang, 2 platoons in Quy Nhon, which was to the north of that, and then 1 platoon in Pleiku, which was up in the highlands, and that was more up towards the area where the first cav was.
Can you take me on a mission, maybe something that comes to mind? Just take me on a mission to go in and pick up the wounded, everything from a call to actually going in, the support that you had, and then actually evacuating the wounded. Take me on a mission.
Well, I can take you on my first mission because it was an unusual one because I was actually getting my in-country checkout in the Huey. Now, I was checked out in the Huey in flight school and everything, but when you get to the unit IP, instructor pilot, he takes you out to see what kind of skills you have. And so we were out working in an area that was relatively secure, and he heard a call go in back to the base camp or back to base to ask, they needed a Dustoff and for a South Vietnamese with an arm wound. And it was about 8 miles away, just up the beach over a little ridge line. So he called in and said, "Oh, we'll go get that." It just sounded like a secure area and everything else. So we went in and you get their call sign and you get their frequency, and then you call them and you identify them, and they either pop smoke normally, and then they pop smoke, you call the color, and then they let you know that, yeah, you got the right spot. Because if you call the color beforehand, smoke comes up in other places, the same color smoke. So, so we went in and we made the pickup, and we were only about maybe a half mile from the South China Sea. And the instructor pilot said, instead of climbing up here where we would be in what they call the cone of fire, from the ground up to 1,500 feet, we'll go out and go out to sea about a quarter mile, a half mile, and then climb up there, and you don't have to worry about ground fire. Well, he said, so take off across these rice paddies as fast as you can. So I was flying low level across the rice paddies, and we came up on a tree line, and I watched this gentleman in a black pajamas with a machine gun step out of the tree line, and as we went over the top of the tree line, he let loose with a burst and hit us 6 times. Now, we went out didn't bring us down. As a matter of fact, we went out over the sea, climbed up, flew back in but it had been one of the first serious hits that unit had taken in quite a while. And I went back to the aircraft, and the casings that they used had stainless steel outer shells on them, and then the lead went on through. And there was a stainless steel shell in the door, so I took it out with my survival knife, and that was the one I figured that had my name on it. And after that, I just worried about the ones that said, "To whom it may concern." And it was kind of a joke that I carried that around the entire time. Piece of shrapnel from a shell. But the instructor pilot had been there 11 and a half months. He had never gotten hit, never taken hits. And so I also picked up the ignominious nickname of Magnet Ass. So, and that was my first mission. That wasn't a normal mission. Normal mission was you were on standby, you'd get a call into your operations. Operations would call for a dust-off. The crew the co-pilot normally would go out to the aircraft, get the aircraft started. Crew chief would run out, medic would run out, get his stuff going. The pilot would either stay, get all the information he could, come out, and as soon as they were ready to go, they'd be off the ground, total of about 2 to 3 minutes. And you'd be airborne to the location. You'd have the call sign for the unit needing the assistance, the radio frequency. And you'd head in that general direction. You know the coordinates. And when you got out in the area, you'd climb the 1,500 foot over your friendly area, fly out above 1,500 foot. When you got there, identify him on the ground, and then let down and make your pickup. Come back out, climb back up, and go back home, go back to the hospital. That would be a step.
You're by yourself?
Normally, yeah. Yeah, there was very, very rarely did we have gunship cover. Very rarely.
Is it because you didn't need it or you didn't have it?
It just wasn't available. It just isn't there. You don't have gunships assigned to medevac units. You'd have to go find them. On a couple of occasions, I've had really where a FAC, a forward air controller, would be talking you into the area, and he'd say, it's a really hot LZ. I do have some help up the river. In my case, it was up the Chiarillo River, and he had 2 A1E Sky Raiders that were up working a couple of miles away, and so he called them, and they came down, and they gave me covering fire when I went in, and then when I turned, after I loaded the wounded and was coming out, I looked up, and here's an A1E in a dive, and he's firing his 50 cals right over the top of my rotor into the tree lines where we were getting the fire from. So yeah, on occasion it really came in handy, but it wasn't there all the time. And fixed wing, had fixed wing coverage once, and helicopter coverage a couple of times where there'd be Cobras in the area. And unless you were taking fire and you knew where it was coming from, you know, then you'd have to identify the spot. I did have one night mission where Smokey, which was the C-130 gunship, Puff the Magic Dragon, you've heard that terminology for it. We were going in and we'd start down and we'd start taking tracer fire and we'd break off. The ground troops would tell us to break off, and did that like twice, and then again somebody came up and were monitoring our freak in the...
You want a drink of water?
Yeah, let me get a drink.
And just hold it up in your lap. It's not
Okay.
in the picture. Don't worry about it.
So, yeah, the Smokey came back above. He says, "Hey, Dustoff 19, you know, put these lights on." We put those lights on so he could see us. He said, "You know, top lights on the aircraft." And so we put those on. He says, "I got you." He says, "You know, try it again, and when I tell you to brake, you brake." In other words, so, you know, we were going in, we saw the fire coming. He said, brake left," and we broke left. And you kind of turn back to the right to see what's going on. You see this tongue of fire come down, you know, fairly close. You know, it looks close at night. And he said, "Go around and try it again. I don't think you'll have any trouble." And we didn't. We went right into the LZ, made the pickup, and, you know, got out. Now, whether he hit them or he just scared them so bad that they weren't going to fire anymore. So you did get, you know, you worked as teams. And those, you never saw those guys. You talked to them on the radio. It was, I always equated it to being, everybody was trained to do their job. And you got together and you came up with a plan on the run. And you said, "Okay, here's what I'm going to do." And they'd say, "Okay, here's where I'm going to be. Here's how I'll cover you. You brake here, or you turn left, you know, turn right. And when you do, I'm going to, you know, hit the spot that you just left," or stuff like that. So it was well orchestrated without a maestro, except everybody working together. And that was really a unique challenge.
Tell me a little bit about the Huey helicopter, what it consists of and who's in it.
Well, I flew two different versions in Vietnam. Flew the D model, which had a less powerful engine. And the example I use for the D model is that when we were doing hoist pickups, especially on the side of a mountain or something, get a density altitude up pretty high, you know, 2,500 foot range, 3,000 foot range. You'd let the hoist down and you'd be at 6,600 RPM, and that's what you fly at all the time. It's all stabilized. You don't, the throttle jockeys went out when the Huey came in. Most of the helicopters I flew before that, H-19s and 13s and things, they all, you had to manually move the throttle and the you know, the collective, you know, to make the aircraft go up and down, and the power, and put power in it. With the Huey, that was all synchronized automatically into the turbine system, because the others were reciprocal engines. So, but when you get a body on the end of that hoist, down about 70, 80 feet in trees, 100 feet, and you'd start pulling them up, his weight would actually pull you'd have to pull more power, and you'd pull the rotor system would actually start slowing up, and it'd get down to about 6,000 RPM. And now you're shuffling. You can actually feel the aircraft. It's sitting there, it's flying, but it's shuffling through the air. And so you try to get them up as quickly as possible, get them in the aircraft, and as soon as you do, you get back down the hill, get your airspeed going, get your RPMs back up, and get your rotor speed up, and fly away. When we got the H model Hueys, it was entirely different. It had an L13 engine versus the L11 engine, had a lot more shaft horsepower, and you could do, I could do hoist missions with 3 and 4 people up at 5,000 feet density altitude, and you'd never feel a strain on the aircraft. To me, the aircraft was built to be in combat. Shot up 21 different times. I was never shot down per se. Aircraft absorbed a lot of, would take a lot of hits. Unless you got something in a critical component, it would fly. It was a real workhorse and would survive in the field. We'd be out in the field in field locations 4 and 5 days with just a mechanic with us, and he'd just keep the aircraft going. We'd do our daily inspections and do the daily things he had to do. But it was a real warhorse. And I think any Huey pilot that you talk to will agree to that.
So if I wanted to shoot down a Huey, do I know what I'm shooting at? Did those Vietnamese, did they know what they were going to shoot
Oh,
at?
sure.
The hydraulics, or what are you shooting at?
You're just trying to hit the aircraft.
Yeah, okay.
It's not that easy. It's moving, you're moving, it's moving rather quickly. It's depending on if you're coming down, you've got more than one trajectory, more or less, you're trying to avoid. So you don't make it easy for somebody to hit you, but there are times when if they lead you, but they don't shoot to get a hydraulic. Normally most of your hits were in the blades or in the tail. A lot of hits in the tail or in the back of the aircraft, in the doors and stuff. To lead an aircraft and get it in the nose was pretty tough. But most of the hits, did have a funny experience one night. We were tying down after a rather long day, and you go over the aircraft with your flashlight and look up at the blades, and the mushroom was on the bottom side of the blade. In other words, we had taken rounds, but the hole was on the top side of the blade, and where they came out, where the shrapnel or you can see where it splits a little bit, that was on the bottom side of the blade. So they were either firing from the mountain above us or caught us in a pretty steep turn in a valley, but we never even knew we were hit that day. But you find the holes when you're going over it. When they hit when you got hit in the metal on the aircraft, you could hear it. It was like a firecracker going off. But you just you concentrate on getting your job done, and that didn't stop you. And of the Dustoff guys, our motto was "Not till I have you wounded," and you always you kept going until you had their wounded. And that was pretty much the creed we lived by.
Say what the motto was again.
The motto?
What did you say it was?
Not till I have you wounded.
Not till I have you wounded. Okay.
Right. In other words, they say, get out of here, not till I have you wounded.
Okay. Can you just tell me about some of the things you remember about the wounded, if you had any interaction with them, and what kind of wounds were you picking up, and how many people were you putting on board?
Usually it was only one to two, mainly one individual. On occasion it'd be, you'd have one urgent and then 2 or 3 that weren't urgent that they'd ask if you had room for them, and you'd take them back too. Excuse me. I did have one experience where we could tell from where we were on the beach. At night, early in the morning, we could see there was a heck of a firefight going on up a valley. And in the morning at first light, I got a call that they had 30 urgents. And we got there, and it was a Korean unit, and they had them laid out on the rice paddy, on the berms. And I got there, and that's the first time the only time I had to get out and do triage. And I'd say leave him, and take him, and take him. And that's a tough thing to do, but when a guy's got half of his head missing, and he's still alive, but you pretty much say, would I want to spend the rest of my life that way? You take the guy that, may have the gut wound or the arm wound or, serious leg wound. But as I was going back into the hospital, towards the hospital, which was down on the beach at Tuiwa, I look out over the South China Sea, and I see a Chinook, which is a big twin-engine helicopter. And I called them on guard, which is a channel that you can go up, and everybody monitors it. And I called him and I asked him to come up, Dustoff frequency, and he did. And I said, "What's your status?" And he said, "We're coming out of Vung Tau. We've just come out of maintenance and we're going back to Ankei," and they were out of the first cav. And I said, "You're empty?" He says, "Yeah, we're empty." I said, "Well, I've got 25 more urgents." I took out about 5 on the first trip. I said, "I've got 25 more urgents. I've got other birds coming from, in the Trang, but it's going to take them, half hour to get here, 40 minutes to get here." I said, "I could really use some help." And he says, first question out of his mouth, of course, he's a Chinook driver. So he says, "Is it hot? Is it a hot LZ?" And I said, "No, actually, I've been out walking up and down the berms doing triage. So it's not hot. The Koreans have it secured." So he said he'll go. And he went with me with the empty Chinook, and they loaded them all on, and we took half of them back to the American hospital, and he landed at the I took another load to the American hospital, and he took his load to the South Korean hospital, which was down the beach a little bit. And from that day on, I knew about miracles, but that day I really believed in them. It was to see that Chinook there, empty, and say he'd come help was really a godsend. Not for me, but for those guys that we were picking up.
I want to go back just a minute. Can you give me a little bit of history of Vietnam, why we're even involved there? And who we were fighting?
Well, you were fighting communism, which was in the north. That it had a Chinese more or less backing for North Korea. They had expelled the French from Indochina. The South became, in other words, a separate country. They split the country in half. The North then became communistic, and the South was a free society. The North then started to invade the South, and the United States went in. And this is when the domino theory was in, and same thing in Korea. You don't give them South Korea, you fight for it, or communism will just keep taking over. So it was, and we were successful. We're still in South Korea. In Vietnam, we pushed them a long way, just as the Americans did in Korea. They pushed them all the way back to the Yalu, and then the Chinese got involved. And I think the body counts and everything else in Vietnam is what persuaded the government to give the South Vietnamese the wherewithal to protect themselves. But once the North had all the backing of the Chinese, and then when they invaded, so it was at that time. It was the Cold War, but those were the little hot spots that were creeping up popping up all over the world. That just happened to be one of them, and it's one that the United States chose, as they did in Korea, to try to stop the continuation of the communist movement, especially in Asia.
And what can you tell me about the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese Army? We're fighting both factions?
Well, the North Vietnamese Army were essentially, they just came out of the North. As a matter of fact, I actually Medevac one of the first uniformed North Vietnamese that we picked up when the North Vietnamese tried to cut the country in half in the highlands in middle summer, early spring of '67. And then actually Tet of '68 was a tremendous defeat for them. Even though they got into the cities, we won back every city, they took horrendous losses, but the political ramifications, and that was the start of the downfall of the withdrawal. But it was not because of a military failure, it was because of the political pressure that was brought. But they were just like the South Vietnamese were, they had different ideologies, but they fought hard, but nothing spectacular different than any other soldier. probably weren't as well trained and well equipped as our people. That made a big difference for our people, for our soldiers and Marines.
Tell me just a little bit about the Tet Offensive. What was that all about? Were we on the offense going in and doing our thing, or tell me what that was?
Well, the Tet Offensive was the North Vietnamese infiltrated all the major cities throughout South Vietnam, and then they, went in and started firing right in the middle of the cities. When the troops that were out in the field looking for them reacted, went in and then cleaned them out. So it was, it was a Tet Offensive, and they did it on a holiday, which was a no-fire, which was supposed to be agreed to by both sides, that there wouldn't be any, and they did that, during Tet. It was a religious holiday, so it was, they pretty much, didn't live up to what they said, and then once they took over, got into the cities, once our troops got into the cities and the South Vietnamese troops got into the cities, they took the cities back immediately. So it was a great defeat militarily for the North, but politically, because of news media and everything else, it was that they said that's the start of the downfall of the pullout from Vietnam.
So you're trained as a helicopter pilot. Did you have to ever fire a weapon yourself or get into action like that, or was it the situation ever call for that, or were you safe? Protected from that type of thing? Or?
Normally protected. While we were unarmed, per se, I did carry a .38, which was my personal weapon. I also carried an M2 carbine, which somebody had left on the airplane at one point. Excuse me. And you get to a hospital and the guy's got his weapon. Hospital doesn't want it, and it's laying there, and so I had a sling on it, so I hung it over my shoulder, and same thing happened with an M79 grenade launcher. So, and I always felt that if we did get shot down, they weren't going to respect the Red Crosses, and we'd be in a fight. So as much firepower as we could have on board, at least to hold our own or set up a perimeter. I kept those, but I never had to use them. Only on one occasion where I was flying, I landed they were burning some rice paddies, and old scrub in there, and we were supposed to land on one side of the smoke, and through a miscommunication, we landed on the wrong side of the smoke. And I knew we were in trouble when I saw the co-pilot take his .38 out and start shooting it out the window, but that's the only time. And we went back over the other side of the smoke real quick and picked up the wounded we were looking for and got out.
What about the dead? How were they taken out of the area?
They were taken out on resupply missions. When they got resupplied by slicks, or then the dead were backloaded. I did, and it's written up in a book, but you weren't supposed to take the dead out. I did get a call one day for a mission, went to the unit, and they couldn't even get to an LZ to load. They had one urgent at the time, and I tried to get to them, and they had no LZ. They kept moving. They said they couldn't even stop to do a hoist pickup, so they just were trying to get out from an engagement. And later that afternoon, or early that evening, we got a call. It was the same call sign. So I went back, and by this time they had gotten down into a rice paddy area and had an LZ, and they had a secure LZ. And they said, they had two wounded. And when we got in there, I asked, what about the guy we came for earlier? And they said he was a KIA. And they had him laying in a rice paddy. And I said, well, I came to get him this afternoon. I'll take him. And we put him on, and he had a sucking chest wound. They had put the right bandage on him, a big bandage, and apparently when they were carrying him and laid him in the rice paddies and laid him down, it had sealed. And when we got him on the aircraft, he was wrapped in his poncho. When we got him on the aircraft, we heard a moan. The medic cut the poncho open, and the guy was alive, and we got him back. I don't know if he lived, but we got him back to the hospital, and so sometimes when you do things you're not supposed to do, it turns out good.
But normally you wouldn't take out the dead, though.
No, and you never even, you'd see them maybe, but they were taken out by resupply. When they got resupplied with ammo and food and stuff, then they'd backhaul their KIAs.
Well, what are your thoughts today about Vietnam? Do you find yourself thinking about what you went through or the war? I mean, what do you think about Vietnam today? I mean, what part does it have in your life?
After staying in the military for another, I've had a total of 37 years, and that was the first 4 years, so 33 more years. It really, when I got back in '67, you could walk down the street in your uniform. Nobody was, disrespectful to you or anything. And so I really never had, what I would call bad PSDT, post-traumatic stress syndrome. I did, like my mom said, I went and visited her over Thanksgiving weekend, and she said, "I'll never forget, you came home on the 4th of July, we were having a party, you walked in and you said," you knelt down and you said, "Ma, I didn't kill anybody." But and I look at it that I have 1,000 frontline medevacs, so I hope a lot of those guys are still alive because of my actions, and so I look at it as a very positive thing. I learned discipline. You learn to control your emotions, and I say that it's and I use this as more or less as it's very difficult flying an aircraft and trying to give a guy a finger that's shooting at you out the window. So it's you do what you have to do. You set your mind to it, and I've found that in flying's like that, but flying in combat like that, especially on the Dustoff mission, was extremely, you were dedicated to it. You became that was your driving force, and you got it done, and continue on with your life. So it's been I've had a great life, good wife, kid, and been very active in veterans activities. Visit Perry Point quite often. So I don't take it as a negative from my perspective in my life. I take it as a very positive that I grew up real fast and became a man real quick, and I don't regret a minute of it.
You said you had 1,000 frontline casualties?
1,000 frontline medevacs.
Well, what does that mean? You picked
Well,
up 1,000 guys?
it moved 1,000 guys in the year I was there.
And you only picked up one or two at a time?
One or two at a time, yeah. I had 593 combat hours over the year, and that's not a lot of hours. Most of the slick guys got 1,200 hours, but our missions weren't 4 and 5 hours. They were 20 minutes out, 2 minutes in the LZ, and maybe 16 minutes back, because once you got you wounded, the one thing, when we had the D models especially, we used to push the aircraft to their limits, flying them up in the yellow arcs, trying to get the wounded back to the, and I can remember, and you say, did it affect you? Yeah. The medic would reach over and tap me on the shoulder and say, slow down, slow down. I lost him, meaning the guy he lost him he died in the back, so slow down. Don't kill us all just to get this guy back. He's already dead. And I didn't, you'd cry, and then after a while, after about 6 months of that, you don't cry anymore. You just do your job.
Well, that just, to me, it's a lot of work, a lot of people. I've talked to some of the pilots that were with the gunships and all
Right.
that, or the missions they would go on, the air assaults or what have you, and just listening to you and thinking about all that, I'm very intrigued by what the helicopter was used for, and just your role there. I mean, I'm assuming that today's EMS system was patterned off of the Hueys going in and picking up the wounded, you think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And actually, it's a throwback to the Korean War with MASH. Now, mainly in MASH, they were picking them up at aid stations. They weren't picking them up on the front lines in the aircraft they were in. H-13s and H-23s and bubbles, and they had them on external. And actually, a little known fact, the Huey is designed, the first Huey, the A model, was designed to be an air ambulance so that you could carry the patient inside. Because if you look at the shape of a Huey, the nose is here and then it bulges out and then it comes back and then you have the tail. Well, that bulge section is exactly the dimensions, 2 or 3 inches wider than the standard Army litter. Excuse me. So yes, the A model Huey was designed to be a medevac bird, and then the B model, and then when they started putting guns on them and everything else, and then you got the C model and the D model, Mike model, and then the H model. So that all, it developed, but it started out to be just like the guys on MASH.
Did you lose any friends that were pilots during Vietnam?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Part of your group, or maybe
Guys I went to flight school with. I did lose guys in the unit.
Were you aware of it at the time, or you just heard about it, or how did you find out about it?
Normally you heard about it. One, it was kind of ironic. When I was in flight school, there were 4 bachelors, and of the 4 of us that went over, 3 of them went to the CAV. 2 didn't come back. 1 came back, and he'd been shot up pretty bad, but he lived and went on to fly in the Coast Guard. And but when we were in flight school, I showed up with a 62 two-door Blue Falcon. Well, the guy in the room next to me, Dickie Meehan, who actually was from here in Maryland, out around Hagerstown, he showed up in a 64.5 Mustang. That's when they first came out. We just went to flight school, and man, oh man, we all loved that car. Every place we went in his Mustang. So when I got to, when I was in Vietnam, Ford actually set up in the PXs, you could go in the PX and order a Ford car. And in September of '66, I ordered when they first came out, I ordered a green Mustang convertible 67 to be delivered. You give them $100 down, they give you a contract for what you order, and you get a thing that you put in your pocket, and it says, bring a cashier's check for $3,800 to your local Ford dealer on such and such a date, and your car will be there. And it was, it was an incentive, and it was a pretty good deal. And I had done that, and I came out and I saw a guy from the CAV, and I yelled to him. I said, "Hey, you tell Dickie I got a '67 green Mustang convertible with a white top and white interior waiting for me when I get home." And the guy turned and said, Dickie was on that bird that they try to resupply, that they were trying to resupply that unit that was getting overrun the other night, and he went in the side of the mountain. Dickie's not going to worry about it. Well, I drove that 67 green Mustang, 22 years, put 225,000 miles on it, look over in the other seat every now and then and say, "Dickie, I'm doing okay down here. How you doing?" And if you walk outside now, you're going to see I drive a 1994 or 2004 green Mustang, or no, a 1994 green Mustang convertible. And I guess I'll drive green Mustang convertibles till I'm not driving anymore. But that's just part of the, and I still think about Dickie and the other guys. And out of the, coming back, being the only one that came back without a scratch, and being in the job that was, supposedly we had the highest percentage, because there weren't that many Dustoff pilots. Percentage-wise, the losses were pretty high. And I belong to the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association and the Dustoff Pilots Association. So it's, you stay in touch. I've been to a couple of the reunions. And it's you have an appreciation for guys who've been through what you've been through.
Have you been to the wall?
Yes.
Can you tell me what you felt the first time you were there?
Yeah. The day it opened, I was raking leaves at the house. And I don't do things on the spur of the moment. Put the rake down, walked in the house, told my wife I was going to the wall. I'd be back. And I drove down, and I parked, and I walked, and I could see it. I tried to walk up to it, and I couldn't. I'd break down. I did that 5 times. Uncontrollably or controllably, and I'd walk away and gather myself, and then finally got to walk up to the wall and looked up, looked for all my buddies in the same time frame. And then it dawned on me, and standing at the wall, that in that year I was there from 66 to 67, the 13 middle panels of that year. So I was there when it was got a little tougher towards the end of 67, but 13 of those panels span that year, and those are the longer panels. So it was, and when the wall came here, I was the keynote speaker for it. When the miniature wall, 4/5 version came here, I was asked to be the keynote speaker, and I was very honored to do that. And I was asked by the Vietnam Veterans Association to do that. And they sponsored it here. So it's been, I do a lot of public speaking in schools on Americanism and patriotism, not on war, on, what it means to be, love your country, do your job. And that can be, when you're 16, join the fire company, the volunteer fire company. And if you want to serve, when you feel that, and you want to get in the military, fine. But, it's not for everybody. But if you have that desire, then I say do it, because you'll be a better person for it, or at least it'll expand your horizons.
Wally, what should people remember about Vietnam?
That the individuals that were sent there went to do the job they were given to do. Individually, they did a pretty good job. Politically, or I should say through media manipulation, it probably wasn't as we're seeing today in Iraq. It wasn't the most popular thing, and so but the individuals that went, just like the heroes of World War I and the heroes of World War II and the heroes of Korea, and the guys who went to Vietnam were heroes. You went and you did your job. You were asked to do it, and most of them they did have the draft, but quite a few were volunteers, like myself. College graduate, pre-med degree, and looking to go to medical school. That's the only thing I'm really ticked at the Army about. They promised to send me to medical school when I got back, and then they found out that they could draft doctors, but you couldn't draft combat experienced helicopter pilots to be instructor pilots. So I never got to medical school.
Being a veteran and an American citizen, Wally, what does freedom mean to you, and tell me about the price for freedom?
Well, I think everyone should be willing to lay their life on the line for it. That's what it's about. It's the one thing that we have here in America. We've had, it's what the forefathers, the founding fathers, the idea they had, and we've done fairly well with it for 200 years. We're not perfect, but each generation has to step forward and say, I'm willing to pick up that mantle and carry it forward. And I think we see that now, and there's no draft, yet, we still have people volunteering for the military, and it's not just the Navy or the Air Force, it's all the services. And so it's, and I think a lot of it comes from how your family background, how how the country is looked at in your family, how it's, you know, the reverence it's, you know, that's shown to the laws and everything else. If you're law-abiding and understand that you have responsibilities to keep those laws and to keep what we have, then I think, you know, and there are young people, when you talk to them, I understand and I'm willing to go and do it. And that's, I think that's been the way throughout American history, and I think it's going to continue.
What does the American flag mean and represent to you?
Well, it's the symbol that we live under and that fight for, and low be the person that doesn't respect it. And I fly the flag at the house 24/7, lighted. As I say, when I go to the schools, I speak on the flag, speak on the Maryland flag as well. But, you know, that it is a symbol, but it is also something that you can hold up and say, this is what people have given their lives for, and it's a representation of this great nation. It's the symbol of our nation. And, you know, that's, we actually, on Flag Day at the Legion, we do have a flag retirement ceremony, which is very, very formal. It's something that people, you know, be worth to come and watch. Yes, they are burned, but they're burned with such great ceremony that it's, but to see somebody, you know, I won't say wearing it because it's a, you know, a tie or something with it on doesn't upset me, but somebody desecrating it, I have a little bit of a tough time with that, and I'd probably tell them that in no uncertain terms, even though I'm getting a little older. Still work out every day and still a soldier.
Wow. When you're flying a helicopter, did it ever get routine?
No. It's never boredom. It's actually, there's an old saying, it's hours and hours of boredom with a few moments of stark terror thrown in. But you better be paying attention all the time. The aircraft will reach up and smite thee if you not treat it with great dignity and respect. And no, it was never boring. It was exciting. There's a saying, it's the most fun you can have with your pants on, but I better not say that.
Oh, that's good. I was going to ask you about the helicopters.
Well, I thought of another one you asked about, and I'll give you an example. You asked about, you know, interaction with the wounded and stuff. Yeah, on occasion we walk through the hospitals, but on one occasion, and I'll just relay this. We had picked up a airborne, rather large African American young man out of the, I think it was 101st. And he had been hit with our own napalm on a short napalm round. We got him into the hospital, and you know, he was still breathing and everything. And the medic, you know, we did everything we could to get an airway going and everything. When they got him there, the people from the hospital came out because we called ahead of time to tell them we had a burn, severe burn. And somebody from the hospital commented and said, "Just take him to Graves registration." And out of this charred mass of humanity came this guttural sound that I will never forget. Hair standing up on my arms to this day. "I airborne. I ain't dead yet." And they moved him to the hospital so fast. Those stretcher bearers ran with him. And I never went back because we dropped him off at a hospital, and we learned after a while not to walk through. You know, some of them weren't there and some of them were, and it was just the thanks were getting them there, not going in to ask for somebody saying, "Oh, thank you for bringing me in." So it was more or less, my job's done. Now it's you medics, you keep them going, we got them here. But that, I'll never forget that. That was, yeah, and that's how he felt about it, and I think most other guys did.
Wow.
That's total dedication.
Yes. Yes.
And, you know, it's same thing about the flag and about this country. And I know people think that's hokey, but I don't think so.
I would have to wonder about all the other people that you transported. I mean, what kind of, were there specific kind of wounds, or did you have to know what kind of wounds, just whether it was an urgent call or not? I mean,
Well, they'd let you know it was an urgent, it was, you know, critical. Urgents, you'd let the hospital know so they had the right teams ready to take them into surgery or something. But an arm wound or a leg wound, we had, you know, non-life-threatening. Just like you hear now, you know, he has a non-life-threatening, but you want to get him to a hospital as soon as possible. You know, a lot of extremity wounds, a lot of blast wounds where, while the rest of the guy is okay, he may be missing a limb. So they've, you know, his unit's already put a bandage on the stump, and you're just trying to keep him alive, keep him out of shock, and get him to a hospital so they can manage the blood flow and everything else.
are there sights or sounds or smells today that remind you of Vietnam?
No, not today. Not really. Except the one, the sound of a Huey. Great sound. And there's still some around. Most of them are painted blue with white stripes or something, and there's a joke among old Huey pilots that the day the last Black Hawk goes to the desert and is retired and they've got some new big fancy airplane with all its sophistication, the crew will be flown back in a Huey. Probably be owned by a contractor, but they'll be flown back in a Huey.
I would love to go up in one someday. I don't know if that's possible or how I would do that, but maybe you could help me do that. I don't know.
Well, we don't have any left here, but there, you know, and there aren't many left in the military. The Black Hawks have pretty much taken over all that responsibility. But they're still around, and a lot of commercial operators use them. That's why I say commercial operator would be the way to go.
You ever miss flying the Huey?
After 25 years, I walked off the flight line without a scratch, and a lot of people say, you know, some guys don't last a year, so I flew for 25 years. Yeah, I miss it, but it's not, you know, could I fly one? Probably. It's like riding a bike, I think, you know. If somebody show me where the switch is, I'll turn it on and get it running, and you can fly it. It becomes it's second nature to you. It's there was a joke because I became an instructor pilot, and even when I was a colonel, I was still a unit instructor pilot because I taught guys how to do helo casting and hoist missions, things that hoist missions especially that we pioneered in Vietnam. People say, you know, skills. I said, well, I used to be able to fly up a gnat's ass, come out his mouth, and make him say, excuse me. Now I just look for bigger gnats. So.
I want to ask you to do one more thing. I hope it's
Sure.
okay. I understand the protocol of a salute, but for the camera's sake and for the purpose that I use this for, from where you're seated, when I tell you, could you just give me a salute into the camera?
Sure.
Okay. I'll let you know when then.
Okay.
Okay, sir, right in the camera. Great. I want you to stay there. I'm going to take a picture of us, okay?
Okay.